Welcome to Compassionate Cultures, the podcast. You're about to go on a journey of empathy, understanding, and transformation. Get ready to dive into the heart of humanity's most pressing questions with me, Rebecca Hemmings, the CEO of Strawberry Words Training Consultancy, and guests. It's time to turn up the volume on kindness and to amplify the voices of minorities that often go unheard. This podcast asks questions like, how can we create workplaces where ethnic minorities thrive without the chains of career stagnation? What if universities were safe havens for all, free from the storm of microaggressions? And how can we bridge the gaps between cultures that have been divided by the walls of bias and ignorance? This is not just a podcast. This is a revolution of empathy. Welcome to Compassionate Cultures, the podcast. Get ready to explore, learn, and change the world one compassionate conversation at a time. Hey, so welcome back to Compassionate Cultures, the podcast. I'm Rebecca Hemmings, your host. And so today we are talking about cultural humility. Don't worry if you've never heard about it before, because that's what this episode's all about, is about explaining what it is and how your organization can adopt this. Okay, so what is cultural humility? Let's get straight into this. Okay, it's an ongoing process of self-reflection and personal critique. It's the ability to recognize your own cultural biases and actively seeking to understand and respect different cultural perspectives. Okay. Really important, and I think it really says what it is on the tin. It's being culturally humble. It's being open enough to say, you know what, I don't know everything. I need to find out more. How can I find out more respectfully? It's just that. Okay, so where did it come from? So it's a relatively new concept that was developed by Melanie Tervalon and Jan Murray Garcia in 1998. So originally this was kind of confined to the healthcare field, but now it's used in a variety of industries and fields such as education, public health, social work, and so on. Okay, because it's you can use these tools wherever. The idea is that you go beyond cultural competence and awareness to becoming culturally humble. I love it. I really do. I really love it. But there are three main areas, three main commitments, if you like, that cultural humility encourages individuals to adopt. Okay, number one is having a personal lifelong commitment to self-evaluating and self-critiquing. So this is not, so what I love it. I love it. And I'll come back to the things I really love in a moment. But what it's saying is that, it's not just about attending a one-day course on cultural humility and then, I'm done and dusted type thing. It's saying that, no, I'm going to make a lifelong commitment to evaluating and self-critiquing and making sure that I never just feel like I know it all. Okay, it's kind of similar to what Ibram X. Kendi, who wrote How to Be an Anti-Racist, says, is that basically to be an anti-racist, you've got to keep being active in order to do the work. It's the same concept. So that's number one. Number two, recognize there's a recognition of power imbalances and a desire to fix those power imbalances and to develop relationships with people and groups and advocate for others. Love it. So that's number two. And then also that there's institutional accountability, because, if you're working in an organization and let's say, managers are on board, even we've got the majority of the workforce on board, but leadership isn't, how do we ensure that policies and practices or the culture of the organization exude cultural humility? It's highly unlikely. So it's saying that there has to be institutional accountability and commitment to cultural humility. So why do I love cultural humility. Again, I think I kind of alluded to them, but I'll just spell them out, spell some of the reasons I love this out. And again, you know, going back to that whole self-reflective practice, we do that all the time. You know, in order to self-reflect, you have to be able to drop your ego. You have to become human again. So rather than you walking around being your job title, which often we can do as individuals, you know, hide behind our rank, hide behind our job titles, hide behind, you know, my role. No, it's saying you're a human first, and as a human, you are biased. We are all biased, and it's recognizing that and being humble enough to recognize that, being brave enough, vulnerable enough. And for that to happen, the workplace or various environments have to be safe enough to do that. So again, it's creating crafting compassionate cultures, as we're always talking about. It's crafting those compassionate cultures to enable that self-reflection, self-critique to take place. I love that. What else do I love? I love that there's this focus on there being this lifetime commitment to doing the work, because as human beings, we've been conditioned by the media, by, you know, the way we've been brought up, our own cultural frames of reference, you know, by many different factors to make us look at different groups of people in a certain way. Even if you don't think you do, I promise you, you do. And you do. That's just the nature of being human. Please don't argue with me. Go and take the implicit association test to go and test your biases for one. But, you know, one of the arguments around unconscious bias training is that it doesn't work. It has no impact. And I can understand that. You know, if all you do, which is what unfortunately a lot of companies do, is if all you do is put on a day's training or even a 2-hour training course on unconscious bias, and there's no more work ever done towards unconscious bias, then of course that's not going to get rid of unconscious bias. It will create awareness, but it's not going to get rid of people's or reduce people's biases. And if you want to know more about how to do that, I've done some episodes recently on some research Harvard University has done. So please go listen to those podcast episodes. But yeah, it's important that, yeah, it's a lifelong commitment and not just a one-off training course, because they don't work. They don't work. I say this a million times and I'll say it again. It's like, you know, expecting to go to the gym once and get a 6-pack. It's just not going to happen. Okay. And then what I also love, again, is it encourages people to see systemic discrimination. You know, when we start our training courses, that's what we always start with, is getting people to understand that discrimination is systemic. Power imbalances are in place. Some people have more resources than others. So when people can see that, they can then realize that there's a bigger picture, because a lot of people don't. A lot of people think, well, I don't say those horrible things to people. I don't do those things. Therefore, this thing doesn't exist, or I'm not a part of that problem. That's those people over there. None of that is helpful. So by understanding the systemic nature of discrimination and looking at those power imbalances, you can begin to see that, wow, okay, this is kind of huge. And then think, well, what can I do to help towards creating a more equitable world or organization? Okay, so again, I just want to come back to the fact that cultural humility is more than cultural competence. Cultural competence is basically saying that, right, I understand, I have enough knowledge about a particular cultural group, right? That's it. I'm competent. I've ticked a box. That's it. I don't need to keep learning. The learning ends there. And there are lots of problems with that, you know, because it doesn't factor in intersectionality. It doesn't factor in people's differences. Not everybody, you know, does things that are culturally typical. You know, we're still individuals at the end of the day. So it's problematic for a number of reasons. It doesn't mean that it's not useful. You know, it is useful. It's very useful to have information about cultures. It gives you an idea. However, you also have to be open enough to still question your position, your thinking, your biases, and know that people are individuals. Okay, so just want to quickly share with you the importance of cultural humility within organizations. What does it do? Well, what does it do? It creates an inclusive workforce, because they then become better equipped to create inclusive environments. Does that not, make complete sense? If people are open to questioning their own biases and thoughts and the company's policies and procedures and attitudes and behaviors, then more voices will filter through, more voices will be heard, and therefore more people will feel like I belong here because I'm being heard, which is great. Okay. Of course, then that will enhance communication and collaboration. Again, as more people feel like I can really show up to the workplace and really, and those skills and different knowledge sets will be valued. Okay, and of course, it goes a long way to reducing biases and discrimination.
Hey, I know you're enjoying the podcast episode, but I just want to quickly come in and say, look, if you're an organization that needs anti-racism training for your organization because your staff are lacking in a racial literacy, they don't have the words, they get stuck when talking about racism, they want to be able to deal with incidents, but they're not sure how to, then check out our Time to Talk About Race online CPD accredited course at strawberrywords.co.uk. Okay, we can train from 10 to 10,000, but get in touch today at admin@strawberrywords.co.uk. Now back to the episode.
Okay, because again, people are constantly questioning the way that they're thinking about particular, using inclusive language. Is it okay for me to use this pronoun, but I feel uncomfortable using this pronoun, but actually doesn't it affect me really? And will this person feel respected if I use the pronoun they choose to use, for instance? So, practical steps, very quickly. Again, I always try and make these episodes like 10 minutes, but they tend to be longer. Right, quickly. What can you do in your organization to foster cultural humility? Number one, there has to be leadership commitment. If leadership are not on board, I've said this already, then the house of cards will fall down. It just won't be as, it's highly unlikely you're going to create a culture that is compassionate, that is able to have those safe spaces, that is truly inclusive and equitable, okay? There has to be training and education in cultural humility, in unconscious bias, in effective communication with different cultures and so on. Okay, there has to be spaces for open, safe dialogue. There has to be room for that. And, within, for instance, various regular meetings, where's the space to have these conversations? Space needs to be made. Okay, and of course, really importantly, policies, practical policies need to be implemented or reviewed or created and implemented in order to reflect a culture that is humble. Okay, so I just want to finish with an example of this, a real life example. Well, just an example of how this works or should have been working in a particular instance. So there has been a lot of discrimination within schools around hair discrimination. So just imagine, okay, forget schools for a minute. I'm going to come back to that. Excuse me. I'm going to come back to that. So imagine in a workplace, a black woman walks in with an afro hairdo and the manager's like, I'm sorry, Sandra, but you can't come in with that hairstyle. Policy states that's unprofessional. Can you change it? And she's like, no, this is how my hair grows out of my head. This is hair discrimination. You can't do that. And the manager's like, well, actually, yeah, we can. So there's a problem in that. So how can you deal with this in a culturally humble way? Well, firstly, question the assumption that's being made. So often when someone lacks cultural humility, it's because they're making lots of assumptions and which lead to stereotypes. What's the assumption that's being made? So question that assumption. Is it true that wearing an afro to work is unprofessional? How can you know it's true? Who decided that this was the rule? Okay. How does afro hair differ from different hair types? Okay, so it'll get you thinking around some of these rules that have been put in place, sometimes and normalized, but they're often discriminatory, but no one's questioned that. Other questions to ask: do I have enough cultural information about afro hair to make this decision? Where can I learn more? Google is your friend, okay? There are lots of books also. Does the hairstyle have an impact on this person's work? And question whether the policy is discriminatory, and probably isn't this, it will, yeah, is in this instance, unless for any reason that hairstyle prevents her from wearing a protective headgear or something. And if it is, change that policy. So this has been happening in schools in the UK, and I know it's been happening in the States as well, where children are being sent home because they're wearing cane rows, which is like when your hair is plaited flat onto your head, hair extensions, their own afros, dreadlocks, and so on. They're being kept away from learning because of their hairstyle. Oh, let me not even get into this, but you know, common sense has prevailed. And so now there are new guidelines now from the Equality and Human Rights Commission here in the UK. So that's the EHRC. Because this has been happening time and time again. And what they basically say is, under these new guidelines, school uniform and appearance rules that ban certain hairstyles without considering a person's race will likely to be against the law. So if some of these head teachers and teachers had gone through this process of questioning, and, you know, so that they could become culturally humble before acting upon these so-called rules, so-called legitimate rules, then they may not have been in a position to have had, you know, protests, and, you know, they haven't had the, you know, the EHRC may not have had to look into this. And thank God, you know, that has happened. But can you understand that by going through that process of questioning, of being self-critical, of evaluating policies that are in place, you know, it could have come to a different outcome, is what I'm saying. Okay. All right. I'm going to end it here. So I just want to say, you know, good luck. And if we can help you in any way in your organization becoming culturally humble, then we're here. You know, we do specific work around training around race, but we also offer cultural humility training, cultural competence training. Also, loads. Look at our website, strawberrywords.co.uk. Get in touch and we can help you with that. All right. But as an individual, I just invite you to just develop that lifelong commitment to questioning your biases. You know, we all have them. All right. Thank you for listening. Bye.